"Step aside and let her check you, or I'll call the police right now." The words hit the quiet courtyard like a slap, sharp enough to make even the kids freeze. The HOA president stood there trembling with manufactured authority, demanding a strip search of a 12-year-old over chalk dust. One mother tried to intervene, another backed away, and the girl at the center of it all kept whispering she hadn't done anything wrong. That's when the crisis truly began, because the moment the officer arrived, the one person everyone assumed would panic didn't. He looked at the scene, at the child beside him, and the air shifted. Something in his calm made Patricia flinch, as if she'd suddenly realized she'd picked the wrong family to humiliate. Before I show you the exact moment she understood the disaster she'd created, you need to know what kind of father she was dealing with. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. He wasn't loud, he wasn't threatening. He just stood there, steady in a way that unnerved people who relied on authority rather than truth. And beneath everything happening in that courtyard, a different story had already begun. One she never imagined would end with her standing on ground she didn't even own anymore. He stepped forward only after Mara wiped her face with the back of her hand, trying to pretend she wasn't shaking. The officer had barely opened his notebook when he quietly said her name, soft enough to pull her back into herself, calm, unshakable, and entirely uninterested in giving the HOA president even an ounce of fear. That was the snapback, the moment the real center of gravity entered the scene, not with force, but with presence. He crouched beside his daughter, grounding her with a hand on her shoulder. She stared at the smudges of chalk still clinging to her fingers, embarrassed that something so harmless had turned into a public accusation. He told her she didn't have to explain anything yet, not until the adults stopped behaving like children. She exhaled a small, uneven breath, clinging to his certainty the way frightened kids cling to warm hands. Behind them, neighbors hovered at the edges, some nosy, some uncomfortable, most unwilling to challenge Patricia. She loved that power, she fed on it, but today she mistook silence for consent. Today she mistook a maintenance tech for someone she could grind under a rulebook. The officer, to his credit, tried to defuse things. He asked Patricia to clarify her accusation. She launched into a dramatic account full of imagined damage and community threats, insisting the girl was concealing something and refusing inspection. Mara's father listened, expression unreadable, until Patricia reached her favorite line. "We have standards here, and if he can't control his child, maybe this community isn't the right fit for people like them." That was when he finally looked at Patricia, directly. Not angrily, not defensively, just clearly. The kind of clarity that dismantles arrogance without a single raised word. The officer noticed. A few neighbors noticed. Patricia didn't. Not yet. Mara tugged lightly at his shirt, whispering that she hadn't done anything wrong. He told her he knew. He always knew when she was telling the truth. His voice stayed steady, anchored, turning the chaos into something bearable for her. That grounding. The quiet father who didn't falter even when police arrived. That's what shook Patricia more than she understood. She weaponized authority. He didn't need any. When the officer stated plainly that no one could demand a strip search of a minor, Patricia's face went tight with indignation. She tried shifting blame, insisting the child's refusal meant concealment. She tried leveraging the HOA charter. She tried everything except humility. And through all of it, he simply asked one question. "Are we done humiliating children now?" The courtyard fell silent, not out of respect for him, yet, but because something invisible had shifted, like the community had been watching the wrong person this entire time. He guided Mara toward their townhouse, never once raising his voice or acknowledging Patricia's sputtering threats about fines, hearings, and appropriate disciplinary action. He didn't have to. While she clung to borrowed authority, he walked with the certainty of someone who didn't borrow anything. Not permission, not status, not worth. And as they crossed the courtyard, he knew one thing Patricia didn't. Her reign over this community was already ending. The power she flaunted wasn't hers to keep, not anymore. Because earlier that morning, the paperwork he had waited months for had finally cleared. The private roadway, the easements, the land beneath every sidewalk. The entire street Patricia believed she ruled belonged to someone she thought she could bully. That truth would not save Mara from the humiliation of this moment, but it would ensure she never faced it again. And soon, the people watching would understand who they had underestimated. The crisis had begun. The reversal was coming. And the woman who called the cops on a child was about to learn what it meant to stand on ground owned by the father she tried to break. He didn't look back as he walked Mara toward their townhouse, but he didn't have to. Patricia's voice was still spilling across the courtyard, sharp and frantic. threatening hearings and fines that no longer had the power she thought they did. He felt Mara's fingers tighten around his. Her small, uneven breaths told him everything she was too shaken to say out loud. The humiliation clung to her like dust. And even though he knew the reversal was already in motion, that didn't undo the bruise she carried inside her now. He opened the door, let her step in first, and closed the world behind them with a quiet click that felt like a promise. Inside, the house hummed with its usual stillness. He watched his daughter sink onto the couch, shoulders curled inward, trying hard not to cry. The facade she'd held in front of the neighbors was slipping. He sat beside her, not touching her yet, not crowding her, just giving her the space to collapse safely. When she finally leaned into him, face pressed against his sleeve, he let out a breath he'd been holding since the courtyard. She whispered that she hadn't done anything wrong. He told her he knew, he always knew, and that it wasn't her job to make unreasonable adults feel powerful. She nodded, small and uncertain, but it was enough. What he didn't tell her yet was how close everything was to shifting, how the paperwork he'd signed at dawn had already begun rippling through systems Patricia didn't even know existed, how the land surveys, zoning updates, and ownership transfers were now in motion, silent and unstoppable. He wasn't interested in revenge, he wasn't interested in humiliating anyone. He only cared that his daughter never stood trembling in a courtyard again, while adults used authority as a weapon. He rose after a while, gently telling her to rest, maybe watch something light. She nodded again, pulling a blanket over herself. When he stepped out onto the small porch, the courtyard had emptied except for two neighbors, both pretending not to look in his direction. Patricia was gone, the officer was gone, but the tension still hung in the air, a faint aftershock. He walked toward the maintenance shed, partly because he needed to think, and partly because habit drove his steps there. It was a place no one looked, no one cared about, no one imagined held anything valuable, perfect for him. As he unlocked the door, he heard a hesitant voice behind him. "Hey, can I talk to you for a second?" It was Brendan, one of the quieter board members who usually avoided conflict. He approached with careful steps. "I just wanted to say I didn't agree with what happened today." The man's guilt sat awkwardly between them. Elias studied him for a moment, wondering whether this was sincerity or self-preservation. Maybe both. "That shouldn't have happened to your daughter," Brendan continued. "I didn't know she'd take it that far." Elias didn't respond right away. He simply asked, "And what would you have done if she hadn't?" The question made Brendan shift uncomfortably. There was no accusation in Elias's tone, just clarity. The kind that stripped excuses bare. "I guess I should have spoken up," Brendan murmured. "It's easier to speak up before a child's humiliated," Elias replied. "Harder after." Brendan nodded, chastened, then added quietly, "There's a board meeting Friday. Patricia's planning to push formal action against you." He'd expected that. It was what people like her did. Double down, escalate, cling to the illusion of control. "Thank you," he said simply. Not warm, not cold, just acknowledgement. Brendan exhaled, relieved to not be pushed further, and walked away. When Elias entered the maintenance shed, the smell of oil and dust wrapped around him like an old coat. He pulled out the battered toolbox he never actually used for work anymore. Inside, beneath the standard tools, lay the documents he kept close until the digital transfers finished updating. Certified letters, land deeds, access rights maps, and a folded note with Mara's handwriting from years ago. "For Dad, because you always fix things." The symbolic object he kept for grounding, a reminder that everything he did began and ended with her. The discovery method for this part emerged naturally. Behavioral consistency. Even in silence, even in retreat, he was preparing. His quiet movements, his lack of retaliation, his steady presence, they were all clues to the depth Patricia never bothered to see. He tucked the documents back inside and closed the toolbox. Victory strategy wasn't about retaliation. It was about exposure. Public exposure. Patricia had already written her own downfall with today's display. He just needed to let the truth surface at the right moment, in front of the right audience, exactly as Phase A demanded. The sun dipped behind the roofs as he walked back home, the courtyard now washed in shadows. He paused before entering, watching the light from the living room spill softly through the curtains. Mara was curled on the couch, half asleep, safe, for now. But safety shouldn't depend on silence or hiding. Soon the street she lived on would no longer be controlled by someone who saw children as nuisances and authority as a weapon. As he stepped inside, he made a quiet decision. Friday's meeting wouldn't just be a confrontation, it would be a correction, Not through force or anger, but through truth revealed in the open, where Patricia couldn't twist it to suit her ego. This was the beginning of the reversal, and the woman who tried to break his daughter's dignity was about to learn that some men don't raise their voices. Not because they're weak, but because they've learned to wait until the world is watching. Subscribe for more if you're following this journey closely. The house had gone quiet by the time he stepped back inside, the kind of soft silence that settles after emotional exhaustion. Mara was asleep on the couch, her hand still clutching the corner of the blanket, as if letting go might bring the courtyard back. He slid the blanket higher over her shoulder, careful not to wake her, and stood there for a moment, studying the tension in her sleeping face. Children should never have to go to sleep, wondering why adults treated them like criminals. He switched off the standing lamp, letting the room fall into a gentle dimness, then moved into the kitchen to gather his thoughts. The refrigerator door gave off a faint hum as he leaned against the counter. Tomorrow would be a normal school day for Mara, or at least he'd try to make it feel that way. But Patricia wasn't done, not even close. He could sense the way she clung to authority, the kind of person who believed rules were weapons and people were obstacles. He'd dealt with that personality type before, in far more dangerous environments. The key was always the same. Let them get loud, let them get confident, let them make their mistakes where the right eyes can see. Then reveal the truth. Public exposure wasn't an act of vengeance. It was a disinfectant. He heard a soft knock from the door leading to the small balcony. It startled him only for a second before he recognized the familiar hesitation in the sound. Mrs. Alden, the elderly widow who lived next door, peeked through the glass. He opened it quietly, stepping outside to keep from waking Mara. The evening air carried the mingled scent of cut grass and distant rain. "She told me what happened," Mrs. Alden whispered, wringing her hands. "I'm so sorry, dear. That woman's been out of control for years." He nodded, appreciating the sentiment, even if it didn't change the damage already done. "Mara's okay," he said softly. "Just shaken." "That's still too much for a child," she replied, her voice trembling with indignation. "And now, the board's meeting on Friday? Patricia's going to twist this into something awful. She always does." Elias studied her lined face, the worry sitting there like a permanent shadow. This wasn't just his struggle. Patricia had intimidated half the neighborhood into silence long before this incident. Maybe that was why no one spoke up earlier. Fear was a habit people didn't know how to break. "Things will shift soon," he said, offering reassurance without details. It wasn't the time to reveal anything, not yet. "But I appreciate you checking in." She placed a frail hand on his arm. "You're a good father. Don't let her make you doubt that." With that, she shuffled back to her apartment, leaving him alone with the night. He returned inside, locked up, and sat at the dining table with the toolbox he kept hidden beneath the sink. He opened it again, but this time not for comfort. Now he needed preparation. He spread the documents across the table, smoothing out the folded corners, land ownership confirmations, access rights, zoning jurisdictional maps. The transfer hadn't only given him control of the roadway, it severed a key pillar of the HOA's authority. But the real impact would come from timing. The discovery method for this portion of his arc pushed forward naturally, reputation leak. Not from him, but about him. Someone would mention something at the board meeting, maybe a slip from Brendan or an offhand comment from the officer. Reputation was like smoke. Once it escaped, people started to look for the fire beneath it. He was ready, not eager, not angry, just ready. The next morning, Mara shuffled into the kitchen with sleep-heavy eyes. He'd set out toast and fruit, keeping the morning peaceful. She ate quietly, uncertain whether the world outside had changed overnight or whether she'd return to whispers and stares. He placed a gentle hand on her back and told her the truth. "What happened yesterday says more about her than you." She nodded, but didn't smile. Healing took time. When he walked her to the bus stop, a few parents who'd witnessed the courtyard scene avoided meeting his eyes. Some were embarrassed, some afraid, some pretending neutrality because it was easier. Mara clutched his hand until the bus arrived, then gave a small wave from the window as it pulled away. Only after the bus turned the corner did he let his expression harden. Children shouldn't have to prove their innocence to self-appointed tyrants. On his walk back, he passed the community office where Patricia was already inside, gesturing animatedly at a board member through the glass. Whatever she was planning for Friday, she believed she still held all the cards. That misplaced confidence was exactly what the victory strategy depended on. Public exposure demanded a stage, an audience, and an antagonist convinced she could not lose. When he reached home, his phone buzzed. It was an email confirmation from the investment firm. The transfer records had officially updated in the county system. Perfect timing. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the significance settle. Not pride, just certainty. Certainty that Patricia had miscalculated catastrophically. He spent the rest of the morning repairing a few outdoor lights, blending back into the role everyone assumed he lived in. The invisible worker, the quiet father, the man who didn't push back, because keeping his cover intact ensured the reveal would land exactly where it needed to, right in front of the people Patricia depended on to keep her crown polished. By evening, word had slipped through the community grapevine. A neighbor whispered that Elias didn't seem like a normal maintenance tech. Another mentioned seeing the officer speak to him differently. Reputation, leak, activated. Small sparks, but sparks spread. Friday was approaching, and Patricia had no idea she was walking straight into the most public correction of her life. By Thursday morning, the whispers had grown legs. They moved through the neighborhood in small, cautious steps, quiet enough to deny, loud enough to shape opinion. Elias heard fragments as he walked between maintenance calls, a mother murmuring that he stood too calmly for someone being threatened, a retiree noting the officer's respectful tone, a teen muttering that he'd seen the HOA president actually scared for a second. Reputation leak wasn't about loud revelations. It was about the slow, undeniable shift in how people looked at the man they once considered forgettable. And on this particular morning, they were looking. He kept his posture easy, deliberate. Just another day on the job. Just another man pushing a utility cart with a worn toolbox rattling inside. But every time he passed a neighbor, the glance lasted a second too long. Suspicion mixed with curiosity. The look people gave someone they thought they had pegged, but suddenly weren't so sure. Patricia, meanwhile, had doubled down. He saw her marching across the main walkway with 2 board members in tow, clutching a thick binder overflowing with printed rules. Her heels struck the pavement like declarations of war. When she spotted him adjusting a sprinkler head, her smirk sharpened. People like her always believed the storm belonged to them, never realizing when they were standing directly in its path. "Make sure you're presentable for tomorrow's meeting," she said loudly enough for bystanders to hear. "We'll be discussing your daughter's misconduct and your attitude." He didn't rise to it, didn't even look up. "I'll be there." His calm unnerved her. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You think staying quiet makes you clever? It doesn't. It makes you easy to dismantle." His eyes lifted, finally meeting hers with the kind of measured stillness that made her blink. "We'll see." That was all, nothing more. But Patricia walked away, glancing over her shoulder twice, unsettled without knowing why. Quiet people always frighten those who used volume as a shield. Later that afternoon, Officer Cole returned to the neighborhood, not for trouble, but for a routine patrol. Still, his presence stirred interest. A few residents approached him casually, feigning curiosity about unrelated matters. One neighbor asked if the HOA was pressing charges. Another asked whether the officer had spoken to the maintenance guy again. Cole answered with professional neutrality, but his tone softened when he mentioned the child. The girl didn't do anything wrong. That single sentence spread through the neighborhood faster than Patricia's binder of accusations. Emotional truth always outran fear. When Elias stepped out of the maintenance shed with replaced bulbs for the walkway lights, he found Cole waiting nearby. The officer raised a hand in greeting. "Just checking in?" Elias nodded, keeping his responses minimal. Cole shifted his weight, tapping the notebook tucked under his arm. "There's going to be scrutiny tomorrow," he said quietly, "about how she treated your daughter, about the call itself." "I figured," Elias replied. Cole studied him with a look that suggested he understood far more than he let on. "You handled it calmly. Most people would have escalated." "I don't escalate unless necessary." Cole gave a small, appreciative nod. "Good. Tomorrow, you may need that calm again." He walked away before any neighbors could misinterpret the conversation. But the exchange hadn't gone unnoticed. 2 residents, standing near the mailbox, whispered to each other as the officer left. One shook her head. "There's something off here. That man isn't just a maintenance worker." Reputation leak, Phase 2. Confirmation. By evening, the sky was heavy with clouds. Elias returned home just as a light drizzle began tapping against rooftops. Mara was at the table drawing quietly, her lines softer today, the tension easing from her shoulders. He sat beside her, listening to her describe the scene she was sketching, a treehouse she wished she had. No mention of the courtyard, no mention of Patricia. Healing truly was slow, but it was happening. He made dinner, simple comfort food, and they ate together without the heaviness of the previous days. Near bedtime, Mara hesitated in the hallway. Will she try to do something tomorrow? He crouched to her height. She might try, he said honestly, but she won't succeed. Because you'll be there? Because the truth will be there. he corrected gently. She nodded, trusting that answer, even if she didn't understand the full weight behind it. Once she was asleep, he returned to the dining table. He opened the toolbox again, spreading out the documents in careful order. The ownership deeds, the maps, the transfer confirmation, pieces of a truth Patricia hadn't bothered to prepare for. The HOA controlled rules. He controlled the land beneath the rules. Public exposure required precision. Tomorrow was the moment the curtain would lift. The meeting room would be crowded. Board members, residents, maybe even the officer if summoned. Patricia would attempt to dominate the room, with authority she believed was hers by right. And he would wait, silent and still, until she handed him the opportunity to reveal exactly what she had never thought to question. The key wasn't aggression. It wasn't argument. It was the contrast between assumption and reality, between the image she projected onto him and the truth she refused to imagine. He sealed the documents back inside the toolbox. The rain outside grew steadier, a reminder of how storms build slowly before they break open. Friday was hours away, and Patricia was already walking toward a fall she had built with her own hands, blind to the fact that the man she tried to crush had been standing on ground she no longer owned. The rain eased just before dawn, leaving the world washed clean but tense, as if even the weather sensed what Friday would bring. Elias woke early, the habit of a life spent anticipating conflict, even when conflict now came in the form of board meetings instead of foreign terrain. He brewed coffee quietly, listening to the soft hum of the house and the steadier rhythm of Mara's breathing down the hall. Today wasn't about retaliation. It was about correction, exposure where exposure was needed. When Mara appeared in the doorway, still wrapped in her blanket, he offered her a small smile. "You'll have a normal day today," he said. "School, then home, nothing else." She nodded, trusting him despite the nervous flicker in her eyes. Children can sense when a storm is nearing, even without understanding the pressure change. He walked her to the bus stop again, and this time, a noticeable shift hung in the air. Parents who avoided looking at him 2 days ago now glanced over with guilt, curiosity, or both. A mother offered a soft, "Good morning," voice tinged with apology she didn't put into words. When the bus left, he turned toward the community hall, where chairs were already being arranged for the meeting later that evening. The HOA meetings usually drew small crowds. Tonight, it would be a full house, not because residents cared about petty bylaws, but because Patricia had created a spectacle too big to ignore. People love drama far more than authority. As he walked back toward the maintenance shed, he spotted Brendan pacing near the walkway. The man approached hesitantly, like someone stepping onto thin ice. "They're planning something," he murmured as Elias passed. "Let me guess," Elias replied, not breaking stride. "Censure vote, fines, suspension of community access." Brendan swallowed. "All of it. She's pushing the board to vote on expulsion, claiming you're uncooperative and disruptive." Elias paused then, turning just enough for Brendan to see his expression. Steady, unreadable. "And the board? They're not convinced, especially after the officer's report. But Patricia's loud. You know how she gets." He did. Loudness was her only real weapon. "Thank you," he said, and continued on. Brendan didn't follow. At the shed, he worked through basic tasks, checking irrigation valves, replacing corroded screws on the fence, tightening a loose latch. Behavioral foreshadowing, subtle competence, the unspoken signs of someone who did his work with quiet precision. Neighbors passed by, occasionally, watching him longer than necessary, their gazes no longer indifferent. They weren't sure what they were sensing, only that it contradicted the version of him Patricia had sold them. Near noon, he headed back toward his home, toolbox in hand. He'd barely reached the steps when he heard his name. Officer Cole approached from the walkway, his uniform damp from the lingering moisture. "Big meeting tonight," the officer said. "So I've heard." Cole exhaled. "You should know. I filed the incident exactly as it happened. No embellishments, no omissions." "I expected you would." "But she didn't like what I wrote. Already tried to argue that I misinterpreted her request for a strip search." Elias felt a flicker of cold anger beneath his calm, not at the officer, at the way power protected itself through lies. "She overplayed her hand," he said simply. Cole studied him. "Doesn't bother you?" "It bothers me," he answered. "It just doesn't control me." The officer nodded once, a respectful acknowledgement, then left. The moment he disappeared around the corner, a neighbor emerged from her doorway, pretending to check her mailbox. She wasn't checking anything, she was observing, and when she returned inside, she carried with her exactly what the victory strategy needed. Doubt about Patricia, curiosity about him. Reputation leak had matured into community reevaluation. That was the hinge on which public exposure would swing. Afternoon passed slowly. Elias spent it preparing, not documents, not speeches, himself. Calm wasn't something he performed, it was something he returned to. As the sun dipped lower, the courtyard filled with residents heading toward the hall. He waited until most had gone before stepping outside. When he arrived, the room was already buzzing. Whispers filled the air, tension mixing with expectation. People looked at him as he entered, then looked away quickly, as if afraid they'd reveal too much. Patricia stood at the front, her binder clutched like a shield, her expression tight with self-importance. She didn't greet him. She didn't need to. Her posture said everything. "Let's begin," she announced, tapping the microphone. "We have serious matters concerning community safety, member compliance, and an incident involving one of our maintenance staff." Her voice dripped condescension like oil. Elias sat quietly in the second row. Eyes shifted toward him, then toward Patricia, then back again. The board members appeared stiff, uncertain. Perfect. Doubt was already corroding her authority. Patricia launched into her version of events, dramatic, embellished, crumbling beneath anyone who had an ounce of common sense. She claimed Mara was hostile, that Elias was uncooperative, that she herself had acted within reasonable community standards. By the time she finished, the room felt off, heavy. People weren't nodding, they were waiting. Then she said the sentence that sealed her downfall. "This community cannot be safe if individuals like him remain unchecked." He rose slowly, calm, controlled, every movement measured, and for the first time that night, Patricia's voice faltered. "Are you finished?" he asked. Gasps rippled through the room. Not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. Assertive, steady, and entirely immune to her authority. Public exposure had finally reached its perfect audience. Tonight, the truth would have witnesses. Every head in the room turned as he stood, the scrape of his chair cutting through Patricia's shaky attempt at regaining control. She hadn't expected him to speak, certainly not like this, not with the kind of calm presence that silenced even those who usually enjoyed the theatrics of HOA drama. She clutched her binder a little tighter, jaw tightening as he stepped forward just enough to face her directly, without crossing any invisible line of hostility. "I asked if you were finished," he repeated, tone level, almost gentle. Yet the room felt the weight behind it, authority without aggression, confidence without noise. Patricia opened her mouth, but whatever retort she had planned wavered under the collective attention now fixed on him. One of the board members cleared his throat, trying to break the tension. "Perhaps we should allow him to respond." Patricia snapped. "This isn't a debate." "It became one," he said evenly. "The moment you accused my daughter of being a threat to this community." A soft murmur rose from the back rows. People leaned forward, sensing that something far bigger than a hearing was unfolding. Reputation leak had done its job. The room was primed to question her version of events. Public exposure required an audience willing to see, and today they were ready. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "My daughter was doing chalk art, something harmless, something joyful, something children are supposed to enjoy." Patricia's expression tightened. "She defaced property." "Rain-washed chalk off a utility box," he replied. "Hardly defacement." "She resisted inspection. That's non-compliance." He met her gaze steadily. "You demanded a strip search of a 12-year-old. Gasps erupted. Even those who'd heard portions of the story looked stunned, hearing it so plainly stated. Patricia sputtered. "I never used that phrase." Officer Cole, seated near the back, spoke up. "It's in my report." Silence followed, real, suffocating silence. Patricia's face drained of color as every eye pivoted toward her. The board members shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware they were no longer defending a misunderstanding, but standing beside misconduct. He continued, not pressing the moment too hard, simply allowing truth to reshape the room. "A child was humiliated. You escalated. You called law enforcement. And you continue to twist the story to protect your pride." Patricia slammed her hand on the table. "You think you can stand there and lecture me? You work for this community. You answer to me." That was the opening, arrogance made visible, the kind of statement that made exposure effortless. He could feel the shift, a collective recoil as residents heard the entitlement behind her claim. Even the board flinched. "You misunderstand my role here," he said quietly. Patricia scoffed. "You're a maintenance worker." He allowed a beat of silence to settle, the kind that makes people lean in before they even realize they're doing it. "Maintenance is what I do. It's not who I am." Whispers rippled through the room. Someone muttered, "I knew it." Patricia, refusing to lose control of the narrative, pointed a trembling finger. "See? He's hiding things. He's manipulating." He took one step toward the front, laying his toolbox gently on the table beside her binder. The symbolism wasn't lost on Anyone. Her rules versus his reality. The room watched, breath held, as he unlatched the metal clasps. Behavioral foreshadowing meets revelation moment. Not full exposure yet, but the hinge on which it would swing. He didn't pull out the deeds, not yet. That would come at the precise moment the room fully understood the imbalance of power. For now, he removed only one item, the folded note with Mara's handwriting. For Dad, because you always fix things. He set it on the table between them. The room softened for a moment, confusion mixing with emotion. Patricia blinked, not understanding the significance. This, he said, is the reason I don't let people like you define us. Not with fear, not with humiliation. For the first time, Patricia faltered. Her voice wavered. This is irrelevant. It's completely relevant, he responded. Because while you treat authority as a crown, I treat responsibility as a promise. A board member whispered aloud, forgetting professionalism. He's right. Another added. She crossed a line with that child. Patricia spun, betrayed. Excuse me? I run this board. You did, someone murmured, her face flushed with fury. You think you can challenge me? You think you can dismantle this community? He looked around the room, letting his gaze rest briefly on each resident. Slow, calm, steady. I'm not here to dismantle anything, he said. I'm here to correct what's been broken. That line landed harder than anything else he'd said tonight. It carried the cadence of someone accustomed to stabilizing chaos, not fueling it. Someone who'd led before, someone who'd commanded, someone who didn't need a title to hold authority. The board chair finally spoke. We need to hear all sides before any motion is made. Patricia exploded. There are no sides! But she was wrong. The room had already shifted. The careful balance of fear and silence that had upheld her power was gone. People no longer saw a leader. They saw a liability. And he saw the precise moment to move toward the next stage of his strategy. Not yet the reveal. No. But the step that made the reveal inevitable. He closed the toolbox calmly, fingers resting on the lid. When you're ready to discuss facts instead of fear, he said, I'll continue. The board chair nodded. We're ready now? And just like that, the meeting belonged to him. Tonight, Patricia didn't realize she had already lost. Tomorrow, she would learn why. The room settled into a tense, anticipatory silence after the board chair's declaration. Patricia stood rigid at the front table, her binder trembling slightly under her grip, though she tried to mask it as righteous indignation. Elias remained where he was, toolbox closed, posture steady. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't trying to dominate. He was simply waiting, letting the weight of the moment tilt naturally in the direction it was always meant to go. Then, let's continue, the chair said quietly, almost cautiously, as if aware that the ground beneath them had shifted. Patricia forced a brittle laugh. This is absurd. We are not turning this into a disciplinary hearing for me. He's the one under review. A resident near the aisle muttered, Doesn't sound like it anymore. A few others nodded subtly. Seeds of doubt had grown into something sturdier. Collective awareness. Public exposure wasn't just about showing documents. It was also about allowing people to witness someone's character collapsing under its own weight. Elias spoke again, voice low but clearly audible. My daughter is the one who endured the humiliation. My only intention here is to ensure nothing like that happens again. To any child. It was a simple statement, but it cut through the lingering tension. People shifted, uncomfortable with the reminder that this whole ordeal began not with property rules, but with unnecessary cruelty toward a child. Faces softened, mouths tightened. Patricia's eyes flashed with panic she tried to disguise. You're twisting the narrative, she snapped. Your daughter refused inspection. That was suspicious. A father in the back row shook his head. She's 12. My kid would have cried too. Another resident added, Inspection? Really? It's chalk. Patricia's face tightened further. Her authority was slipping, visibly, unmistakably. And in that slow unraveling, the victory strategy deepened. Public exposure thrived in these moments of undeniable contrast. Her desperation, his calm. Her accusations, his clarity. Her arrogance, his restraint. The board chair opened a folder. We also received the officer's statement. Patricia stiffened. That report is biased. Officer Cole, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. It's factual. Your interpretation, it's factual, he repeated, firmer now. You demanded an unlawful search of a minor. I intervened to prevent it. That's what I wrote. Gasps broke across the room again. This time, they weren't soft. They were sharp, collective, undeniable. Patricia's binder crashed shut as she slammed it onto the table. I was protecting community property. Elias tilted his head slightly, at the cost of a child's dignity. You don't understand the responsibility I hold. Responsibility isn't the same as control, he replied. You confuse the two. The board members exchanged glances. They hadn't planned for this. None of them had expected the narrative to tilt so decisively. But they were witnessing truth they could no longer ignore, and the authority they once feared was now embarrassing them in public. And then the symbolic turn came, the pivotal emotional shift that deepened the story's momentum. Mrs. Alden, the elderly neighbor rarely involved in HOA matters, rose slowly from her seat. Her thin hands trembled as she clutched the back of the chair in front of her. I watched what happened from my window, she said. That child, she looked terrified. And you, she pointed at Patricia, were yelling as if she were dangerous. Her voice cracked. No child deserves that. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was devastating. A witness without agenda, without politics, without fear. The room fell into stunned quiet. Even the board chair seemed moved. Patricia's composure cracked. This is turning into a witch hunt. You're all being manipulated by someone who isn't even... She stopped herself, but too late. Isn't even what? Elias asked softly. Isn't even part of the decision-making process, she hissed. Your maintenance. A few residents winced at her tone. The mask had finally fallen. He stepped forward another inch. Not threatening, not confrontational, simply closer. Yes, maintenance. The person you overlooked. The person you dismissed. The person you assumed had no ability, no voice, no place to stand beside you. Patricia looked smug for half a second, believing she'd regained control by reducing him publicly. But then he added, and the person you forgot to research before attacking. Whispers erupted, curiosity sharpened. The board chair shifted in his seat. Even Officer Cole leaned forward slightly. What does that mean? A resident asked aloud. He didn't answer. Not yet. Not during this part of the strategy. Timing mattered. Exposure wasn't the reveal, it was the build. And right now, he needed Patricia to reveal more of her own recklessness. She took the bait predictably. It means nothing. He's pretending to be something he's not, trying to intimidate us with theatrics. He stayed silent, letting the room grow curious, letting her dig the hole deeper. That's enough for now, the chair said, raising a hand. We'll continue the review before any decisions are made. Patricia sputtered, furious at losing control. You're letting him hijack the meeting. We're letting truth take precedence, the chair replied. Elias returned to his seat, every movement deliberate. The toolbox sat at his feet, unopened. Not yet. Not while the room was still shifting, still adjusting to the imbalance it had just realized. Public exposure wasn't complete, not until the truth was undeniable, but today the foundation had cracked, and tomorrow those cracks would widen. Patricia had no idea the next part of the reversal was already waiting for her, written into documents she didn't know existed. On land she believed she ruled, and under the feet of every person in this room. Tonight had damaged her authority. Tomorrow would dismantle it. The board chair called a short recess, but no one actually left the room. People stood, stretched, whispered, exchanged wide-eyed looks. The atmosphere had transformed from routine HOA politics into something electric, a slow-burning realization that everything they thought they understood about Patricia's authority and about the quiet maintenance man was wrong. Elias remained seated, hands relaxed on his knees, eyes lowered. He didn't move toward the toolbox. He didn't need to. The moment wasn't ready yet. Patricia paced near the front like a cornered animal, whisper hissing at two board members who looked increasingly uncomfortable being within arm's reach of her. Her veneer of control had cracked wide open, and she was trying desperately to patch the pieces before she lost the room entirely. But control only worked on people who feared you. Tonight, fear had shifted sides. When the meeting resumed, the chair attempted diplomacy. We'll continue with closing statements before moving forward with board recommendations. Patricia immediately seized the microphone. This has gotten out of hand, she began, her voice shaking with forced composure. We cannot allow sensationalism to replace structure. We have rules in this community, and I am responsible for enforcing them. If residents can attack me publicly just because their feelings are hurt, then we have lost order. Someone in the back muttered, "It was a child, not a criminal." The comment rippled forward, gaining murmured agreement. Patricia's cheeks reddened. She pointed toward Elias with a trembling finger. He is manipulating all of you. He's pretending to be calm, pretending to be measured, but this man is dangerous. I have reason to believe he's hiding something from all of us. A few residents stiffened at the word dangerous, but most exchanged skeptical looks. Patricia had overreached again. She always attacked when cornered. It was her only survival tactic. Elias finally lifted his gaze, not in anger, but in clarity. Dangerous? He repeated softly. Patricia straightened, sensing another blowback, but unable to stop herself. Yes, you. You're hiding your past. You don't tell anyone anything about yourself. People who hide things have something to fear. A few residents laughed under their breath. Not loudly, just enough to let her know the accusation was thin. Calmly he rose. Let me ask a question, he said, directing it not to her, but to the room. Has anyone here ever asked me about my past? Silence. A few shook their heads. Has anyone here ever spoken to me beyond asking me to fix something? More head shakes, a few uncomfortable looks. Then how? He asked softly. Would anyone know what I'm hiding or not hiding? It wasn't accusatory, it wasn't smug, it was truth spoken plainly enough to sting. Patricia bristled, seeing her narrative slipping again. People don't need to know your past to see you're dangerous. Dangerous? How? He asked, still calm. She flailed. You're unpredictable. Or, perhaps, he said, I simply don't allow children to be bullied. A low wave of agreement swept the room. Patricia tried to speak again, but this time a board member held up his hand. Enough, Patricia. We heard your concerns. Those were the words she feared most. We heard your concerns. It meant the board was stepping away from her. The chair turned toward Elias. If you have anything further to add before deliberation, you may speak now. He nodded once, then lifted the toolbox and placed it on the table. The metal latches clicked open, soft, yet so loud in the tension-heavy room. People leaned forward. Patricia stiffened, sensing a threat she couldn't describe, but instead of pulling out documents, he lifted only the symbolic note again. This is why I'm here today, he said, voice gentle. Not to fight, not to embarrass, to remind this room that power cannot come at the expense of dignity, especially a child's. The room softened again, visibly moved. Patricia scoffed. That's it? A sentimental plea? No facts, no evidence, no justification. He looked at her, really looked at her, then carefully set the note down. Facts are coming, he said quietly. But facts without context are just paper. Tonight isn't about my power, it's about your choices. Patricia paled, understanding only fragments of what he meant. The board chair cleared his throat. Before we proceed to a vote, we need to review community concerns that have emerged since the incident. One by one, residents stood, not in anger, not in frenzy, but in calm testimony. A mother describing Patricia screaming at her son over a bicycle. A retiree recounting being fined for flowers planted 2 inches outside the approved perimeter. A man sharing how she threatened to shut down a charity car wash for not filing the right form. Each story wasn't dramatic on its own, but collectively, they painted a portrait of misuse, small abuses adding up to something undeniable. Patricia shrank with each account. Binder no longer held like a shield, but clutched like a life raft. Then, Mrs. Alden rose again. This isn't about petty rules, she said softly. It's about safety. If she humiliated one child, she can humiliate another. That line hit harder than anything else said tonight. The board members exchanged looks, the kind that indicate consensus forming. Patricia saw the shift and panicked. You people are being deceived, she cried. He's orchestrating this. All of you, look at him. Look at the way he stands there, like he's in charge. Every head turned to Elias. He wasn't posturing. He wasn't smirking. He was simply standing still, hands resting on the toolbox. Calm, steady, unwavering. He's controlling the narrative. The irony was too sharp. A few residents snorted in disbelief. One whispered, "He hasn't even raised his voice." Public exposure had reached its peak. Her unraveling was almost complete. He closed the toolbox gently. "No one is forcing anyone to speak," he said. "They're choosing to." Patricia's voice cracked. "I won't allow this." But the room wasn't hers anymore. The board chair raised his hand. "We'll take a short break before the vote." As people stood, buzzing with adrenaline and realization, Elias remained still. The next part of the strategy was waiting. The reveal. But not yet. This part was about the community seeing who Patricia was, not who he was. Before leaving the room for air, he glanced toward the hallway and murmured, just loud enough for those nearby to hear, "Truth doesn't rush. Subscribe if you're with us to see where this goes next." He stepped into the hallway, the muted hum of restless conversation spilling out behind him as the meeting room door closed. The air outside felt cooler, sharper, as if the building itself knew the temperature of the night had changed. Elias leaned against the wall, steady breath in, steady breath out. The strategy was unfolding exactly as it needed to. Exposure first, reveal second. Patricia's authority had cracked in front of everyone. Now the pieces simply needed space to fall. Residents filtered out in clusters, whispering, glancing at him, glancing back toward the room where Patricia remained cornered by her own unraveling. He wasn't the center of their attention, her collapse was, but their looks carried something new. Not suspicion, not curiosity, but recognition. Recognition that he hadn't spoken a single aggressive word, yet somehow controlled the tone of the night through measured restraint. A young father approached. "I just wanted to say thank you," he murmured. "My kid's afraid of her, too. Someone needed to stand up to her." Elias responded with a small nod. He didn't absorb praise. He didn't need it. The only approval he cared about was waiting at home, asleep. Another voice came from his left, clear, authoritative. "You handled that well." Officer Cole stepped into the corridor, arms crossed, watching Elias with the perceptive eye of someone trained to read people. "She's losing control of the room." "She lost control the moment she tried to weaponize humiliation," Elias replied. Cole nodded slowly. "They're going to vote soon. It won't be in her favor." "Maybe," Elias said. "Or maybe they'll hesitate. Fear is a stubborn thing." Cole studied him, brow tightening. "Most people in your position would have exploded long before now." "I'm not most people," Elias answered. A simple truth. One Cole seemed to understand instinctively. Before the officer could respond, the meeting room door opened. Brendan stepped out, pale and sweating. His voice dropped to a whisper. "She's demanding the board go into executive session. Says she has classified concerns about you." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Classified?" "She's claiming you might be a threat. She wants the board to privately review your employment status before the community hears the vote." Of course she did. Cornered people always sought closed doors. Darkness favored those afraid of transparency. "Will they agree?" Elias asked. "They don't want to," Brendan said. "But she's pushing hard." "Then let her," Elias replied. "There's nothing behind a closed door that can't be revealed when the door opens again." Brendan blinked, confused, but Cole understood. Patricia was behaving exactly as the victory strategy needed her to. Digging deeper, isolating herself, escalating paranoia. Inside the meeting room, Patricia's voice rose sharply. "We cannot allow him to influence this room. He's manipulating everyone with theatrics and a sympathetic child." A board member responded, weary. "We've seen your behavior, Patricia. That's not manipulation. That's consequence." Residents standing in the doorway winced at the tone. The unraveling was no longer subtle. It was happening in front of them, like a slow-motion collapse. Elias didn't re-enter yet. He waited, leaning against the hallway wall, with the same stillness he once used in far more hostile environments. Stillness that unnerved the unsteady. Stillness that served as a mirror for those unraveling. Finally, the board chair stepped out. "We're reconvening in 3 minutes," he said, voice tense. His gaze met Elias's. "You should be present for this part." Elias nodded, picking up his toolbox. The weight was familiar, grounding. The documents inside remained untouched, waiting for their moment. As he stepped back into the meeting room, it felt different than it had an hour earlier. The audience had grown, spilling into the hallway as people came to watch the ending of a story Patricia had unknowingly written for herself. The board members sat stiffly, exhausted by a night that had spiraled far beyond their expectation. Patricia stood at the front, cheeks flushed, eyes wild with indignation. The chair raised his hand. "We will now give Mr. Ward a chance to present any final information before we call for a vote." Patricia exploded. "This is ridiculous! He doesn't deserve a platform. He's lying. All of this—" "Patricia," the chair said sharply, "sit down." The command, not suggestion, not request, hit her like a slap. She trembled, but she obeyed. Authority had shifted. The room knew it. She knew it. Elias walked to the front slowly, quietly. He set the toolbox on the table again. Residents leaned in, expecting fireworks, expecting secrets, expecting some dramatic revelation that matched the tension in the air. He opened the box. Patricia's breath hitched, but instead of documents, he lifted the same folded note again. Soft, worn, written in a child's hand. "This is the only thing that matters tonight," he said. "My daughter's trust, her safety, her dignity." The room softened, again. Patricia looked baffled, unable to understand why a man facing public attack wasn't fighting with aggression, but with purpose. "Nothing else needs to be said about my character," he continued, "because no parent here should need a resume to defend their own child." A silence heavier than anger settled across the room. Even those who had doubted him earlier now looked ashamed. Then he closed the toolbox. One quiet click. A board member cleared his throat. "We've heard enough. It's time for the vote." Patricia jumped to her feet. "No, you haven't heard anything. He's hiding something. He's pretending." Elias looked at her, calm and steady. "I'm not pretending anything." She glared, breath shaking. "Then what are you hiding?" He let the question hang, the room collectively inhaling. Not yet, he thought. Not now. The reveal needed to happen with precision, with the weight of community decision behind it. The chair lifted his hand. "Board members, prepare to cast your votes on the motion to remove Patricia Keller as HOA president." A gasp rippled through the room. Sharp, loud, final. Patricia froze, mouth open, binder slipping from her hands and scattering pages across the floor. Public exposure wasn't complete, but it had reached the point of no return. The room erupted, not in shouting, but in the stunned, breathless silence that follows a truth too large to ignore. Patricia stood frozen, staring at the scattered papers on the floor, as if the binder had betrayed her. No one rushed to help her pick them up. No one even moved. The motion to remove her had dropped into the room, like a depth charge, and everyone was still feeling the shockwave. The board chair repeated the words slowly, as if making sure everyone heard them exactly. "We are voting on the removal of Patricia Keller as HOA president." A low murmur swept across the chairs. Residents shifted forward, shoulders pressed together, eyes fixed on the front table. Someone whispered, "Finally." Another whispered, "About time." The board members, pale and tense, exchanged glances, not with fear, but with grim acceptance. They'd tolerated her reign for years, but tonight had stripped away the excuses they had used to justify her behavior. Tonight, her authority had become their liability. Patricia blinked rapidly, finding her voice again only after several seconds. No, you can't do this. This isn't how our bylaws work." "Actually," said the treasurer, adjusting his glasses, "it's exactly how they work. Section 4B. A president may be removed by majority vote when found unfit for leadership." "But I'm not unfit," she snapped, voice cracking. "I've kept this place running for years. I've enforced rules no one else had the spine to uphold." A mother in the second row spoke up. "You terrorized our kids." "You fined us for lawn colors," someone else muttered. "You threatened eviction over a wind chime." "You screamed at my daughter for riding her scooter too fast." Each voice rose like a small accusation, not shouted, not thrown, simply spoken. Truth didn't need volume. It just needed witnesses. Patricia shook her head violently. "This is a setup. He's behind this. He's controlling all of you." Eyes shifted to Elias, calm, unmoving, hands folded loosely in front of him. He didn't engage. He didn't need to. Her panic was doing the work for him. Public exposure wasn't about confrontation. It was about showing who someone was when they could no longer hide behind power. And right now, she was unraveling in front of an entire room. The board chair raised his hand. "Board members, cast your votes." Patricia stumbled forward. "No, you don't understand. He's dangerous. He's hiding something. He's plotting something. Patricia," the chair interrupted firmly, "you need to take your seat." She didn't. Instead, she jabbed a finger at Elias again, voice shrill. Tell them what you're hiding. Tell them why you stay so calm. Tell them what you really are." Whispers rippled. People leaned in. The question Patricia kept screaming was exactly the pressure point the room had been inching toward, but Elias didn't rise to it. He simply said, "They're voting right now. Let them finish." The simplicity of it, the priority he gave to due process over ego, made residents look at him with a mixture of respect and something deeper. Trust. One by one, the board members raised their hands. Yes, 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 yes. Patricia's world collapsed in 4 quiet votes. "No, no," she whispered, shaking her head as though refusing reality might undo it. "This is wrong. This is all wrong." The chair closed his folder. By majority vote, Patricia Keller is removed as HOA president effective immediately. Gasps, a few cheers, a stunned hush. Patricia swayed as if struck. Her binder lay open on the table, its contents meaningless now. Her gaze darted wildly from face to face, searching for loyalty, finding none. "You can't do this," she whispered. "You did it to yourself," someone replied softly. The words hit her harder than the vote. Officer Cole stepped forward from the back of the room, professional but firm. "Ms. Keller, given the ongoing concerns about your conduct and misuse of emergency services, you'll need to remain available for follow-up questioning." Her eyes widened. "You're arresting me?" "No," he said calmly. "But you're not leaving the community unsupervised tonight. She turned to Elias again, her last place to direct her fury. You think you won? You think humiliating me fixes anything? You're just maintenance, nothing more. This time, Elias stepped forward, not aggressively, not triumphantly, but with the quiet certainty of someone stepping into the final phase of a strategy he'd planned from the moment she humiliated his daughter. He placed his hand on the toolbox. Residents leaned forward. Patricia backed up a step. You've been asking what I'm hiding, he said. You've been demanding to know what I am. The room held its breath. He opened the toolbox slowly. This time, he didn't take out the note. This time, he lifted the thick envelope of documents, the ones he had kept buried until now. I wasn't hiding anything, he said. I was waiting. Patricia's voice came out a desperate whisper. Waiting for what? For the right moment, he replied. He laid the documents across the table. Land deeds, ownership transfers, easement maps, all stamped and official. The board chair gasped. These are property transfer records. A neighbor whispered, Hold on. Does that mean... Elias looked at Patricia as he spoke the truth she never imagined she'd hear. I bought the street, Patricia. Her knees buckled. No, that's impossible. The room erupted. Questions, gasps, disbelief. He kept speaking, steady and calm. The roadway, the easements, the land your authority depends on. It's mine now. Patricia collapsed into a chair, staring at him as if seeing him for the first time. Public exposure had reached its end. Now came poetic justice. The room didn't just react, it detonated. People surged forward in their seats, whispers erupting like sparks across dry brush. Some stood. Some covered their mouths. Others just stared at Elias as though the man they had walked past for years had suddenly stepped out of shadow and into a shape they'd never recognized. Patricia didn't move. She sat frozen, her fingers gripping the arms of the chair as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Her eyes bounced between the documents on the table and the man she'd spent years reducing to a title. Maintenance. Worker. Nobody. Elias didn't savor any of it. He simply waited, letting the truth breathe. The reaction was not his victory to claim. It belonged to the facts, to the witnesses, to the moment exposing itself without force. The board chair finally found his voice. Mr. Ward, these documents show full transfer of roadway and land easement ownership under the Silver Fern Holdings Trust. Elias nodded once. And you are the controlling member of that trust? I am, he said quietly. Another wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Residents didn't know where to rest their eyes. On him? On Patricia? On the papers that rewrote everything they assumed about the balance of power in their neighborhood? Patricia finally pushed herself upright, swaying slightly. No, this is a scam, a fake. He's tricking you. The treasurer leaned forward, scanning the stamps, signatures, verification barcodes. These are legitimate, county confirmed. Her breath hitched sharply. But why? Why would you buy our street? Why would you do this? Elias met her gaze, steady, calm, unyielding. Because I've seen what happens when the wrong people hold authority, and I refuse to let my daughter grow up under fear. Her face twisted with something between rage and disbelief. You think you can just walk in here and take control? I didn't take anything, he replied. I acquired what was available, legally, transparently, quietly. And why hide it? She spat. Why pretend to be one of the labor staff? Why pretend to be... I never pretended, he interrupted gently. You assumed. You filled in the blanks with the version of me that was easiest for you to dismiss. The words landed like a verdict. A man from the fourth row stood. So, what does this mean for us, for the community? Elias turned toward the room, not towering, not commanding, just present in a way that made everyone lean in. It means the land the HOA depends on to enforce its authority is no longer under their jurisdiction. It means bylaws cannot supersede property rights they don't have. And it means leadership must now reflect actual service, not control. Residents exchanged stunned looks. The implications of his purchase began to settle. Slow, deep, irreversible. Patricia slammed her palm against the table. You're dismantling everything I built. You built fear, he replied. And fear isn't a foundation. It's a threat. Threats collapse under truth. She tried to retort, but the fight was gone. The room no longer saw a leader. They saw someone exposed, loud, brittle, shrinking beneath the weight of her own arrogance. Officer Cole stepped forward. Ms. Keller, I will need to speak with you privately after this meeting regarding misuse of police resources and the incident with the minor. Her chin quivered. You're all turning against me. No, Mrs. Alden said softly. You turned against us long before tonight. The quiet statement broke something in Patricia. Her shoulders sagged, binder slipping from her grip again. For the first time, she looked small, not humbled, defeated. The board chair addressed Elias. "What do you intend to do with your ownership?" "Reform," he answered simply. "Fair oversight, clear standards, and transparency. No more weaponized rules, no more fear." A mother in the audience raised her voice. "Does that mean the HOA is gone?" "No," he replied. "It means it will be rebuilt with a board that serves instead of dominates." The treasurer nodded slowly. "That is exactly what this community needs." Patricia lurched forward in her seat. "You can't remove me and rebuild the board. This is my neighborhood." "Not anymore," someone whispered. She snapped her head toward the voice, but the room had shifted beyond her reach. People were no longer intimidated. They were awake. An awakening was irreversible. Finally, one of the board members turned to the chair. "We should elect interim leadership until formal elections are held." "Agreed," another said. "The community deserves stability after all this." Patricia shook her head violently. "You're betraying me, after everything I did for you." "No," the chair said evenly. "We're holding you accountable. You did that to yourself." Tears formed at the edges of her eyes. Anger, humiliation, disbelief blending into the beginning of devastation. And then, for the first time that night, Patricia fell silent. Elias didn't look triumphant. He simply closed his toolbox. The sound was final. Soft, but final. The board chair took a breath. "Given the circumstances, I move that we appoint Mr. Ward as interim oversight liaison until new elections are held." The gasp that followed was almost palpable. Patricia let out a strangled noise. "You can't give him power." "I didn't ask for power," Elias said quietly. "I asked for accountability." "Yes," the chair replied. "And you're the only one here tonight who demonstrated it." Hands rose across the table. "Yes, yes, yes." And with that, the man she tried to break became the stabilizing force of the community she once ruled. The reversal was complete. Poetic justice had taken its rightful shape. The room did not erupt this time. It settled. It breathed. It exhaled a tension that had been knotted inside this community for years, like a cord finally cut loose. People looked at Elias not with shock anymore, but with something steadier, respect, relief, and the quiet acknowledgement that leadership had shifted into hands that had never once asked for power. The board chair's announcement hung in the air, weighty but welcome. Patricia remained slumped in her chair, eyes blank, binder forgotten at her feet. Her world, built on rules, intimidation, and unchecked authority, had collapsed in the span of an evening. No one taunted her. No one gloated. Her downfall didn't need cruelty. It was complete in its clarity. Elias didn't linger at the front. He didn't bask in attention. He simply gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to the board, then stepped back toward the rows of residents. The crowd parted instinctively, making space as he moved, not out of fear, out of recognition. Officer Cole stepped toward him, offering a quiet word. "I'll escort her out when the meeting ends. She won't cause trouble tonight." "Thank you," Elias said. Cole hesitated. "You handled this with restraint most people don't have." "It wasn't restraint," Elias replied softly. "It was necessity." The officer nodded, understanding there were histories behind that answer. Histories he didn't pry into. Residents began approaching, hesitant at first, as if unsure whether they were allowed to step into conversation with him now that they knew who he really was. A mother from the back row spoke first. "I'm sorry for how long we let her go on like that." He shook his head. "You weren't responsible for her choices." "But we didn't speak up," she whispered. "None of us did." "You're speaking now?" he replied. "That matters." A father stepped closer. "If you rebuild the board, I'd like to help. I want this place to be better for our kids." "Good," Elias said. "It needs people willing to participate, not fear the system meant to serve them." Word spread through the crowd like a warm current. Offers to volunteer, questions about next steps, relief-laced conversations between neighbors who had never spoken until tonight. A sense of community, real community, finally beginning to form. Meanwhile, Patricia tried once more to stand, reaching for her binder as if hoping structure could restore her authority. But her hands shook, and the binder slipped again. This time, no one pretended not to see her struggle, but no one stepped in to save her either. Her reign hadn't ended because someone pushed her. It ended because she'd built it on fear, and fear had finally stopped holding. As the meeting adjourned, the board chair approached Elias. "We'll need your guidance in revising our governing structure. You understand more about stability than any of us expected." "I'll help," Elias said, "but the community will lead." I'm not here to replace a dictator with another. The chair exhaled gratefully. Then we'll build something better. Outside, the night had quieted into a gentle breeze. Residents walked home in groups, murmuring about fairness, responsibility, the future. The weight of the evening pressed behind them, but the path ahead felt strangely light. Elias walked alone toward his townhouse, but only until he saw a small silhouette waiting on the porch steps. Mara sat with her knees tucked against her chest, blanket around her shoulders, watching him under the warm porch light. "Hey," he said softly, climbing the steps. "You're supposed to be asleep." She lifted her chin. "I heard people talking outside. I got worried." He knelt in front of her. "You don't have to be worried anymore." "Did you fix it?" she whispered. There it was, the question she'd been holding since the courtyard, since fear had seeped into her world through the cracks made by someone who should never have had power over her. "Yes," he said, "I fixed it." She exhaled shakily, blinking fast. Then she slid forward, burying her face against his shoulder. He wrapped his arms around her, steady and anchoring. This, right here, was the real victory. Not the meeting, not the reveal, not the title, her safety, her trust, her peace. When she finally loosened her hold, she asked, "Is she gone?" "She won't hurt anyone again," he said. "Not here, not you." They sat together on the porch steps for a while, listening to the wind rustle through the trees, the sound of neighbors talking more gently than they had in years. "You know," he added quietly, "sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay calm until the truth speaks for you." "Like you did?" He smiled faintly. "Like we did. You're stronger than you think." Mara leaned her head on his arm, and for the first time since the courtyard incident, he felt her fully relax. Tomorrow he would meet with the board. Tomorrow reforms would begin. Tomorrow the community would shift into something healthier. But tonight, victory was simple. It was quiet. It was sitting with his daughter on a porch that finally felt safe. And somewhere down the row, residents closed their doors a little more gently, spoke a little more kindly, slept a little more peacefully, because fear had lost its throne, and dignity had taken its place. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?